Welcome to Module 13. In the previous chapter, we looked at the basic mechanics of setting up an Intelligent Advisor hub, the users, the permissions, and the workspaces. This chapter takes a more practical approach to one of the things that most authors, most policy modelers will need to get used to. And this is the concept of uploading and downloading. I've put the title of collaboration here because it is tightly integrated with the concept of collaborating as a team, but it's also related to something I touched on in the previous chapter, that the collaboration features of Intelligent Advisor are actually license-based. So not everything you see in this chapter may be accessible to you, and it'll be nothing to do with your role, nothing to do with being your user. It simply will be that you chose not to opt for that feature. At the end of the chapter, I'll explain to you why I think this particular feature is very important in certain circumstances. Okay, so we're going to talk about this notion of the collaboration features because they introduce a very useful feature to the Intelligent Advisor Hub, the ability to store projects during development, not related to deploying them to the end users. So Steve has finished his work on Friday and he says, Richard, I've finished my work, I've uploaded it to the hub. He doesn't mean it's been made available to the general public. He doesn't mean that it's available on the website. He simply means that he's finished a job and he's checkpointed or versioned his work. He said, okay, I'm done. And he's pushed that to the server. That's a huge benefit for the administrator who can look back through the history of development and see that, okay, yeah, version 3 was the one that Steve worked on. Version 2 was delivered by Richard on this date. And then it becomes very useful if ever we have issues as to find out, well, which was the last working version in development? Stuff like that. We'll come on to that in more detail. The second point is probably the critical one is, most of the time, when you start working with the collaboration features, the question you ask yourself is, okay, I kind of get why I'd want to upload because I'm sending stuff to the server, but under what circumstances do I need to download? It's not always good news when you need to download, so we're going to look at each of those scenarios in detail. One of the greatest features of the collaboration concept is conflict detection. What that means is if Steve and Richard are working both on the same project, on the same document, or editing parts of the same project, to be frank, each of us needs to know what the other one's doing, especially if Steve's got there first and has started editing something, and then I arrive on my own PC and start editing it. I need to know that Steve is already there and that potentially what I'm doing is going to conflict with what he's doing, because then I can take the necessary action, even if the necessary action is put down my keyboard and mouse and ring up Steve and ask him what he's doing. But at least I haven't wasted time trying to run against this concept of collaboration. Also included in the collaboration features is a powerful notion called an inclusion, which we'll talk about at the end of the chapter. So, let's summarize it from the top. The collaboration features are a paid module. You don't have to have it. You can work perfectly well in policy modeling and in the Intelligent Advisor Hub without it. But it brings features that are going to be extremely useful if you have the need to have multiple people collaborating on a project, if you need to be able to track development. For example, if you plan to integrate with continuous delivery or continuous integration, or even your own version control system. I like the last point because sure, we can give you collaboration features. Sure, we can help you upload and download. Sure, we can tell you when there's a conflict. But it all relies on common sense. That if Steve and Richard persist in performing activities that create conflicts and fail to recognize that and fail to understand how to fix it, the best collaboration system in the world will not solve that problem. Okay, so the bottom line is this. The collaboration feature introduces a new tile to the Intelligent Advisor Hub. That tile is called projects or the repository, depending on which version you're working in. So I'm going to log into my hub. I'm going to log in as admin. And on the front page of the hub, if I go to the front page of the hub, you'll notice a series of tiles: deployments, projects, permissions, connections. There may be others depending on what licenses you've bought. But the existence of the Projects tab tells me immediately that this user can access projects, and more importantly, projects is the feature that is brought by the collaboration module. Let's drill down onto a project, and let's notice that I have a project here called RouteMapper, and you'll notice that currently there is only one version. That doesn't mean that it's being delivered to the end users, not at all. It means that the developers so far have only done one set of requirements, or they've only signaled that they've done one version. A development version doesn't mean that it is available to the end users. So if I'm a developer and I go to that project in my application, in my policy modeling, and I make a change, so I'm going to create a new attribute, we'll call it the test attribute. And I click OK. I, in a sense, am creating the future version 2, because the last known version on the server was version 1, and I've gone ahead and made a change to it. So if I upload my change, or changes, and give good comments, and upload it, you'll notice that both the modeler and also the hub, if I refresh my screen for a moment, record the fact that a developer has just signaled that, hey, there's a new version in town, and it's version 2. So the hub is collecting the version history of my developments. I repeat, this is nothing to do with the deployments tab, which is involving giving it to the end users. This is purely for internal use, but it's an incredibly useful feature because I can come back here and download any version at any time. So if I've realized that version 2 was an utter disaster and I need to go back to version 1, I can go back and get them from here, any version I like, provided I have access to this. So the concept of having this project storage area is incredibly important if you have multiple development versions of multiple projects. It would become very hard to manage without it. If you didn't have that feature, you'd probably end up constantly sharing copies of a project as a zip file, emailing them backwards and forwards and saying, hey Steve, I need you to know that since version 1 I've added something. But there would be no way of clearly showing that on a piece of paper. There would be no clear, easy way to store those zip files. We'd have to do it manually. So this collaboration feature known as the repository helps us manage that development process. So already you can see it's going to be really very useful. So as we work, it deploys those, it stores those versions. In case you're wondering, yes, the concept of workspaces that we talked about in the previous chapter still applies. So if Steve is a rule author and he has access to the HR folder, well, he can only push versions of projects that are in that folder. He can't suddenly decide to go and push a new version to something in the ERP folder. So it still applies at the folder, at the workspace level. So it's great for sharing activities, and it's great for sharing and tracking the development process. Fine. So in that little demo, you saw me do the thing that most people are pretty comfortable with, is upload. I need to send the work that I've done for storage on the Intelligent Advisor Hub. Almost everybody gets that as a notion. Is that's great. It's not just sitting on my laptop, it's now sitting on a server, so I have access to it. Where it gets a little more complicated for people usually is download. Well, what do you mean download? Why do I need to download? What's download? Download sounds like I'm getting something from the hub and putting it on my laptop. Surely that's the reverse of what I will need to be doing. So what are the situations that you need to download? Well, I've listed 4, and we'll look at each of them in a moment, but there are many more. I've tried to give you classic examples of why you would want to download. But before we talk about that, just a summary of what upload really means as a developer. So if Steve, the rule author, has created new work in his laptop and he's clicked that upload button, just like I did a moment ago in my brief demo, a screen will appear highlighting, like the one on the left here, all the changes between your new stuff and the last known version. So you can see in my screenshot here that Steve's been really busy. He has added a couple of things. I think you can probably see there's a plus sign there. He has a plus sign there, so he's added that as well. There's also 1 or 2 of them with a check mark, which means they've been edited. And he hasn't deleted anything, but if it had been deleted, you would see a little red cross to tell you that he's deleted something. So this in itself, frankly, is a hugely useful tool, because before Steve sends his work to the server, he sees a summary of the difference between the last known version and the version he has on his laptop. Sometimes Steve realizes, actually, he made a mistake. He didn't need to change something. So another benefit of this screen is that at the very last moment, well, not at the last, Steve gets the chance to say, well, actually, you know what? I don't think that was the right thing to do. So I'm going to revert the modification, which means take this object back to its last known version. So in my case, it would have taken that object back to version 1, because that was the only known version on the hub. So it's a great way of reviewing what you've done and making last-minute decisions about, do I really need to push that to the server or not? Let's assume that uploading is something that you're fairly comfortable with. You make changes, you decide what changes you want to keep, and you send them to the hub. What about the downloads? Those were the 4 things that I promised you. Let's look at them one after another. Scenario number 1. A new team member joins the team and is going to work with you to create policy models and work on the existing project. Let's take it right to the nth degree. They have a brand new laptop, and in that laptop you've installed Oracle Policy Modeling. Great. Well, how are they going to work? Because they don't have your project. Your project is sitting, version 2 is sitting on the server somewhere. So a new team member will need to go to Oracle Policy Modeling, will need to click the Hub project icon, log into the Hub with their username, and download the last known version of the project to their laptop, because it's a brand new laptop, because they're a brand new worker. So they need to recover from the server the last known stored development version. Makes sense. Without it, they're just staring at a blank screen. Scenario number 2. An existing team member, let's imagine that Steve has been away on vacation, and he's had an extended vacation. Perhaps 3 months he's been away on vacation, hiding away. And he returns to work, and he realizes, wow, would you look at that? You know, when I left, there were only 2 versions, but now, wow, people have worked really hard while I was away. You can see where this is going, can't you? When Steve left, we were on version 2. Now we're on version 5. It would be dangerous for us and challenging for Steve if Steve started to work immediately on his laptop. Because what's on his laptop is version 2. Everybody else's laptops or everybody else's desktops, everybody else's PC, they're looking at version 5. And on the server, it's version 5. So he needs to get the latest version. He needs to download those changes that have happened while he was on vacation, so that all of a sudden he can say, right, I'm up to date, guys. I've had a look at what you've done. I think it's really cool. Now I'm ready to help moving forward to version 6. So the first 2 were kind of happy scenarios. The third one is maybe not quite so happy. It's sign that it's synonymous with, something that I wasn't really hoping or expecting has gone a little wrong. Let's say that Steve has made some changes. As you can see in this screenshot, he's made a few changes. He's added something here. and he's about to do an upload. So he's doing what he thinks is right. And he gets an error message that says, project has been changed by someone else. In a way, what he's seeing here is the side effect of the previous slide if he didn't remember to bring his laptop or his PC up to date. Imagine that he comes back from vacation, he hits the ground running, logs into his PC, starts working on his project and says, I've made a new thing, and decides to upload it. The problem is, his PC, which was asleep during his vacation for 3 months, thinks he's about to create version 3. We're already on version 5. So the hub responds with, there's a problem here. You can't do this because other people have got to the server before you have. So there's no way you're going to be able to upload this because you're completely out of sync. You think it's version 2, well actually we're on version 5. So this message means that he would have to go back, just like in the previous slide, bring down the latest version, and then potentially have to do that work all over again. The fourth scenario is a happy one, but a little unusual. So I'm saying that it's not going to happen that often, but it's something that you might see now and again. Let's say that you're working happily with your teammates on version 5, and you've been given a job of adding a new set of policy rules, and they're quite complex, and you have an idea how this might be achieved, but you want to essentially create a copy of the current project just for the purposes of, pardon the expression, playing with it a little bit, trying out your idea, making a prototype. But you want to experiment, if you will. So what do? You do something that at first feels slightly counterintuitive. You say, I have version 5 here and I'm happy with it. I want to bring down version 5 again. So you go back to Hub Project, you say, bring it down. Intelligent Advisor is smart and will say, well, look, you've already got this. So did you really mean to do that? The most logical thing you should do is just keep working with your normal project. But it may be that if you are wanting to create a prototype or to create a copy, you will create a second folder on your hard disk that will contain a complete copy of the project. Intelligent Advisor will make sure that the folder name is different. So you might end up with, let's say your project is called Project A, you'd have Project A_2 as the second folder. So now you have 2, and you're thinking, okay, oops, I beg your pardon. Now you have 2, and you're thinking, okay, cool. It's up to you to remember which one you want to open when you want to play with the throwaway prototype, and which one you want to open when you finally have worked out in your prototype, yes, this works now, and you want to do the work for real. So pay very close attention that you open the right one at the right time. And if you want my advice, when you've finished working with this extra copy and you've brought all the changes, copied and pasted all the changes into the real one, think long and hard, but it might be good to just delete that extra folder when you're finished with it, so that you don't accidentally open it tomorrow and think that you're working on the real one, but you're actually working on the copy, because then you can get into, well, hang on a minute, where's the changes that Steve made? You get the point. Is having 2 copies is a recipe potentially for confusion, so only maintain it as long as you need it. If those 4 scenarios represent the basic day-to-day upload and downloads, one of the really interesting and useful features of the collaboration module is even at a lower level. Conflict detection, we've already spoken about how it detects when there's an issue with your upload and download, but there's also something really very clever that goes on when you're working in Intelligent Advisor and when you're working in policy modeling. If multiple people, if more than one person is working on the same project at the same time. Take a look at this screenshot. You can probably see that I'm in Microsoft Word. And you can probably tell by the presence of the toolbar that I'm working on a Word document for policy modeling. And you'll see a little window on the right-hand side. It says, modified locally, conflicts with work being done by user 2. This message will pop up if you have a conflict, because user 2 is already in this Word document, and you are now doing something in this Word document. So Intelligent Advisor is busy telling you, hang on a minute, why are you both working on this? It's a very simple mechanism. If Steve gets there first and makes changes, and I arrive later on my own PC and start making changes, I'll be the one who sees the message, because it's considered that Steve got there first. Steve is the person who should be editing. I'm the late arrival. I'm the one causing the conflict. So I will see the message. Incidentally, it's not just in Word that you'll see the message. You'll see it in Excel, but you'll also see it everywhere in policy modeling. When you make a change to a screen, a document, a form, an attribute, you will see a little warning to tell you, hang on a minute, this is being edited by somebody else. The final piece of functionality that makes the collaboration modules so attractive to large teams is called inclusions. And inclusions are a very useful concept that allow you to reuse projects. Let me explain. It's a really simple idea. For a given project, let's call it project A, you can include other projects in it. So if you have two projects and one of them has interesting things in them that you want to reuse, when you create your next project, you could say, okay, let's include this in my second project. Sounds easy, sounds a great way to reuse stuff. But they will require a degree of management and a degree of organization, because the model is very permissive. What do I mean? I mean that there's very few restrictions as to what you can do, and therefore issues can occur. Let's take a look in more detail. Inclusions are a simple concept. You can include project A in project B. I am going to switch to the application to show you a brief example. There will be a demo at the end of this chapter, but it's always easier when you see something in front of you. Let's try again. So I'm in a project here, and in this project, you can probably see from my data tab, I have a couple of entities and a few attributes. And I have a couple of rule documents. Let's imagine that this project is one in a series of projects, and each of those projects uses similar concepts. Well, wouldn't it be nice to be able to say, well, look, this is the third project in a series, and it needs to reuse content from another project. I don't want to have to recreate a bunch of stuff if it's common to these projects. So I will go to the inclusions and I will click the add button, and I will say, okay, let's add this project, because this is an important project. And it will tell me this project has 4 versions in it, and look at all of these things here. These are the documents, screens, and attributes that make up this other project. So when I click download, I am essentially adding everything from that project into my project. So when I go to the data tab, you'll go, hey, wow, you got a whole bunch of extra things for free. I am able to see those included elements as if they were created by me right now. But in fact, all I've done is I've included them in my project. So that could have included, oh yeah, look, you got an extra screen here. Wow, you got a whole 2 new screens. You got a bunch of attributes, and you'll notice that there's a little tooltip on them to tell you where it came from. So this allows me to quickly reuse content. Let's just push it back to its nth degree and say, I changed my mind. I'm going to remove this inclusion. It says, you're going to lose all of this from your project. I'll say, okay, I accept that that might be a little strange. I've lost all those extra attributes. I've lost that extra set of screens. So I'm able to reuse content very efficiently. And this is great, especially when you do have multiple projects that essentially deal with the same concept. You'll find that screens can be reused, attributes can be reused, rules in Word documents and Excel documents can be reused. It's a great way of reusing content. But when you include a project, you're automatically including the latest version. And that means that if the other project moves forward, you may remember in my demo just there, the other project had a version 4. If it moves to version 5, I will be responsible for making sure that I update my project to ensure that I am up to date with the changes, because they are essentially two separate projects that will evolve perhaps in their own development flow. So this is it. A project can contain other projects. Those projects themselves can contain other projects. So the potential is that you have your project that includes a 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 project, and so on. Remember what I said about careful management? Remember what I said about careful organization? There's a good example of how it could easily get out of control. You might accidentally have project 1 that includes project 2 that includes project 3 that includes project 2 again. So it is possible to end up having multiple inclusions of the same thing. It's very challenging sometimes to work out where something came from. Notice the third point. An inclusion is just a project. You can't include part of a project. So when I selected add, I got everything that was in the project. I don't get the choice. I get maybe those 2 extra screens are of no interest to me. I can't stop the inclusion process giving me those 2 extra screens. There's no layering. There's no possibility of importing or including just a little part. Which means that if you now have multiple projects that are evolving with different versions, keeping your project up to date and keeping the inclusions up to date can prove challenging. A lot of the customers that I work with, we have a set routine. We have a specific day or a specific time where we go through the exercise of making sure our inclusions are up to date. I'm going to return one last time to the application to go through that process one last time to illustrate an important point. So I'm going to add, I'm going to go back and I'm going to add that again. And this one I've got a whole bunch of stuff. I'll click download. So you can see that I have some extra attributes and some extra screens and an extra Word document here. So that's what I've gathered when I have included this project. You'll notice that this project is in version 18. Maybe tomorrow this project, which is a project on its own being developed by other people, will move to version 19. At which point it will be my job to manually remember to update my inclusion so that my inclusion includes the new stuff. So you've got to think of it as a whole set of processes around managing inclusions. You may notice up here that there's an all inclusions report, which is actually what I want to show you now. An inclusions report, which I'll put on the desktop, allows you to review the situation in respect of which allows you to review your situation as far as the inclusions are concerned. So I'll go to the desktop and I'll open the inclusions report. And I'll adjust the inclusions a little bit. You'll notice that this report says, okay, you have a project called Master 2, which contains a slave project. It includes version 1 of the slave project, but slave has already moved on to version 3, which means you're not up to date, which means Master 2 is essentially looking at an old version when it could be brought up to date to see the new version. So this is an exercise you will need to go through regularly, and you'll need to remember to go to your application and click the update button to update your inclusions if necessary. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that this is not as easy as it sounds. It's going to require management and it's going to require oversight. So that's it in summary. An inclusion is a project added to a project. Here's a simple documented example. Project A had 2 attributes, project B had 2 attributes. If I include B and A, well, now project A displays all 4, and I can see by using the tooltip that, hey, this has just appeared because of the inclusion. Some people see inclusions and some people see collaboration and think, great, this is some sort of branching mechanism. I can create copies of projects. I can create copies of projects inside projects. And they start talking about external tools like GitHub or Jira. And no, collaboration is not a branching mechanism. You will always end up with decisions to be made about, okay, so now I have this project which is ready to deploy. It's on version 18. I want to deploy it in development, and then I want to take a copy of it and deploy it in test. Remember that you will have more than one hub in your environment. So all of what I've spoken to you about is relevant typically to a development hub. But when you move away from the development hub and you take that zip file that you've downloaded and you deploy it on the test or the production hub, then you'll be in a different version number because you'll be in a different hub. So it's typically necessary to automate and document that process. You may find yourself creating copies of zip files with prefixes to remind you that this is the version that came from development, this is the version that went into test, this is the version that went into production. Today, as of July 2020, it is quite challenging sometimes to manage where all those different files go when you have multiple hubs. Which is why I've written at the bottom, a lot of customers choose to automate some of that using API clients and using some of the scripting tools we'll talk about later. In the demonstration, we're going to do the upload and download. We're going to show you the conflict live, and we'll also talk about how you can use inclusions to import project contents into another project. So after that demo, hopefully things have become a little clearer. What do I want to say about collaboration in general? I want to say that, in my eyes at least, and this is obviously my opinion, if you have more than just 1 or 2 people working on a project with Intelligent Advisor, collaboration is a must-have. The amount of time you will lose copying zip files, sending each other messages, you will quickly have a higher cost of ownership than if you'd invested in the collaboration module. It's much more practical for tracking development versions, even if it's not perfect. Some of us would like more granularity, be able to go down to version 1.1, 1.2, and be able to have versions across hubs. Maybe that'll come one day. Inclusions are great, but they need a very high amount of oversight. They are good for standardization. So they're good for copying screens and screen layouts and styles and colors. They're good for generic objects, like there's an object in my project called, there's an entity called the person, and that appears in all my projects. Great, then that's a good candidate for inclusion. It's not a good place to store reference data. It's not a good place to store lots of very complex rules, because do you really want to import those complex rules into every project? Probably not. So it requires oversight, management. It requires a good deal of work up front to decide the best way to do it. That's it for this module.